I'm going to introduce you to the digestive system for the fetal pig dissection. And so there are four verbs that we use in the digestive system, and one is ingestion, and that's when food goes into the digestive system, and elimination, and so that's when we eliminate or get rid of food, so that's going to happen at the end of the digestive system. We have digestion, and we have absorption. So those are our four verbs, and so there are two types of digestion. In digestion, there is mechanical digestion and chemical digestion. Mechanical digestion, if you were to think about this piece of paper as food, and if we were to mechanically digest it, what we would do is we would break it down into smaller pieces. And at the end of the digestion, there would still be pieces of paper, but just smaller pieces of paper. And so that's mechanical digestion. That happens in our mouth, where we chew our food and break it down. But at the end of the day, or at the end of the chewing, it's still just food particles. And then as our food travels down the digestive system, it's going to enter into parts of our system where it's going to be chemically digested. Chemical digestion is when the food is broken down, usually by, let's say, gastric juices, and that is when our food is at the end. So at the end of the digestion, the food is a different substance. It has been chemically broken down. So before this was paper, and now it's carbon dioxide, it's soot all over my computer. And so it is broken down. The products are different than the materials that we started with. And so that is mechanical digestion and chemical digestion. And then absorption occurs in the small intestines when in the small intestines when the very, very small food particles travel from the inside of the small intestines through the lining of the small intestines and into the bloodstream. So it's absorbed into the bloodstream, and that is absorption. So let's put all of these words together with the organs. Digestion begins in the mouth. Let's remember that digestion always begins in the mouth. Ingestion occurs, so we put food into our mouth here. We ingest it. And then we mechanically break it down. We use our teeth, we use our tongue, we use the roof of our mouth, and we chew our food into a ball. It's called a bolus. And as we swallow that bolus, let's move down here. As we swallow that bolus, it's going to pass down into the esophagus. But as it's getting there, it's going to pass the pharynx. The pharynx is the back of the throat, which helps by pushing the food down into the esophagus. But it also aids in, when we breathe, it's going to moisten and warm the air before it goes into our lungs. So it has a couple of purposes. So here we can see that the food is going to travel down the esophagus, right here, travel down. And so here's the path it's going to take from a little bit further back. Here we go, into the stomach. And as you can see, there's another tube here. We call this the trachea. This is some people call it the windpipe. And so we looked at, or we will be looking at, the epiglottis. And so that is the little flap that is right here that blocks the food from going into the trachea or into the voice box, which is called the larynx. And then below is the trachea, which leads into the lungs. And so here we want the food just to go straight down the esophagus, not down the wrong pipe, as some people would say. And so here the food travels down the esophagus, and all the while the food is traveling down the esophagus, there are muscles that line the esophagus tube, and that is pushing the food down. It's pushing all throughout the GI tract. The food is being pushed down. Muscles are sort of just pushing the food down, and that is called peristalsis, which we have right here, peristalsis. Now there are a couple of sphincters, which are round muscles that open and close. And so we're going to have one right here at the top of our stomach. It's going to be called our lower esophageal sphincter. And so that should make sense because it's a sphincter or a circular muscle at the lower end of the esophagus. And that is going to block food from coming back up. So food goes down, it passes through that sphincter, it goes into the stomach, and then it's closed up. If you eat too much food, sometimes the stomach will expand and that sphincter won't be able to close. And that's when we get heartburn, is when we have that gastric juice in our stomach, which has hydrochloric acid in it. It splashes back up into the esophagus, and that hydrochloric acid is a very strong acid, and so it can eat away at the lining of your esophagus, and that's not good. So we want to keep our gastric juices in our stomach, because our stomach is made for that gastric juice. And so if we look here, we can see here is our esophagus, and food goes into the stomach, and there it is mechanically and chemically digested. So the muscles in the stomach go this way, they go that way, and so they can the stomach can squish and churn the food in all sorts of different directions, so that it can mechanically break it down. But because of that gastric juice that has proteins and it has hydrochloric acid and has mucus in it, so that's going to help to break down or chemically break down the food. And so that at this point it's called chyme, and that chyme has a very low pH, or it's very acidic. And as it passes through another sphincter called the pyloric sphincter, the pyloric valve, and it passes into the small intestines, it's going to have a very strong it's going to have a very low pH, and so it's going to be very acidic. So our pancreas does a very important job, has lots of important jobs, but one of it is to produce sodium bicarbonate. And that's just a fancy word for baking soda. Baking soda is going to be secreted, and it's going to buffer, or it's going to neutralize that acid as it goes into the small intestines. And the small intestines, some people call this the second brain. It's very, very important. So what we put into our stomachs and into our small intestines goes into our blood and then right to our brain. So it's very, very important that we know what we're putting into our small intestines, because it goes right into our blood. And so here, our small intestines, lots of chemical digestion happens. We have bacteria, tons of bacteria in our small intestines that eat the food, and then we continue to break down the byproducts. And we also have proteins that are breaking down the food. And then when it gets small enough, it is absorbed. And here's the word absorption. It is absorbed into the bloodstream. And then it is passed around through all of the cells in your body. However, 3/4 of that blood that comes from your small intestines goes right to your liver, which should make a lot of sense. Nature makes a lot of sense. So it's going to go straight to the organ that is going to detoxify it. So there's a low chance that toxins will be able to get into your system, and it helps keep you safe. Now, we also have a gallbladder. This is going to release bile. Bile is going to be released at the very top of the small intestines, and that's going to help us to break down fats like oils and butter. So once the food travels through the small intestines and it's chemically broken down and it's absorbed, it's going to travel to the large intestines. The large intestines are here. In a human, we have an ascending colon, a transverse colon, and a descending colon, and then the feces hang out in the rectum until they are eliminated. And so the job of the large intestine is to remove water from the feces. So at this point, enough water has been removed from the chyme that it's starting to become something called feces. And the longer that the feces stay in the large intestines, the more water is removed. So if your feces stay in the large intestine for a long time, sometimes too long, they can get very hard and hard to pass, and that's called constipation. If the feces stay in the small intestines not long enough, let's say you have a virus and your body's trying to get rid of that virus. It just wants it out of the body, so it's going to pass the food quick through the large intestine and out of the body to eliminate it. It's not going to spend enough time in the large intestine, and so not enough water will be taken out, and that results in diarrhea. And so that is all due to the function of our large intestines, or the removal of water from our feces. Then it's going to remain in the rectum and then be released through not one but two anal sphincters. All right, I hope that helps, and I will see you guys in class.